our primary job is not to develop this software. But I mean, we sit and code every day, so that is our primary job, basically.
Is it easier for you to attract and retain the talent right now that you are moving more modern technologies that are more exciting to work with?
And now we switched it around, so it's R and SAS, and Python is a plus, right? We are now getting over 1,000 people applying for those positions.
Are there any things that you would do differently, having the knowledge that you have now? This is where we bridge the gap between innovation and scientific discovery. This is where technology meets science, a podcast by Appsilon. Each episode brings you insights from industry leaders who are pushing the boundaries of what's possible in life sciences. Enjoy, and if you like the series, click that subscribe button. This series is brought to you by Appsilon, a technology company that empowers pharmaceutical and life science companies to leverage open source technology for faster, data-driven decision-making in regulated environments. Welcome back. You're listening to Where Technology Meets Science, a podcast by Appsilon. I'm Nat, and today I have a guest from Novo Nordisk. It's a company that's an industry leader in R-based submissions into FDA from their commitment in 2019 to shift to another language to their first submission to regulatory authorities only 1 year later. The company has proved that it's not only possible to move away from legacy systems, but also it carries a lot of benefits. And now managers and directors are noticing that it has become apparent that open source is a way to validate things in clinical trials. And today I'm speaking with Ari Siggaard Knoph, a principal clinical data scientist at Novo Nordisk, and also Pharmaverse Council member. Welcome to the podcast, Ari. How are you today?
Thank you so much. I'm doing good.
Cool, thank you. You have been working for nearly 10 years at Novo, is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
So you have been very much involved in the transition from to R-based submissions to FDA. So could you tell me what was your role in the process?
Yeah, I mean, so in Novo Nordisk, we have these lead roles, which we call Global Project Clinical Data Scientists. And I became one of these 5 years ago. And then you become responsible for the programming strategy for an entire drug project. And even prior to that, we were trying to kind of bring R into our deliverables. Kind of with that power that I gained basically through becoming that, I now had power over some trials, over the programming strategy, but also some non-trial deliverables where we could kind of test some of these initial things that we were doing. So I've kind of been much kind of the business executor on kind of getting into our deliverables and having these discussions with authorities and so on, trying to actually do it in real life and using both internal and external packages and so on.
And what was the first trigger for you and for the company to actually to consider moving to R and doing the R-based submissions?
So I think there was a very kind of local trigger here where I am sitting in Novo, because many kind of new statisticians and mathematicians and programmers, they are primarily trained in R. So when we started, me and some of my colleagues back in 2015, we of course really wanted to use R in our daily work, and we also didn't have Git. I think R was offering some of the kind of workflows that we wanted to work with at that point in time. But our first trigger was really that Shiny came out kind of at that point in time. I think it's 10 years ago now, even more maybe. Because, I mean, it's insanely hard to prove immediate value kind of with a new programming language when you're competing against like decades of SAS infrastructure. Like what value can you actually kind of come out and show immediately? And back then we used Shiny as a thing that we couldn't do with SAS and all the other tools that we had available. So we were building Shiny app. So we have one which kind of is actually still alive with the same features from back then, where we review PK and PD data with external stakeholders outside of the biometrics function, and they can comment on stuff and so on. And kind of that was kind of the first buy-in that, okay, like here is some immediate value that this language can provide for us. And then we basically worked a lot kind of passionately on showing that, well, we can actually build a similar infrastructure to delivering trials. And it's not until like one of the kind of breaking points for us was that we did an experiment with one of our DSURs, so a development safety update report, which you which is also a regulatory deliverable. And it follows the same processes as a clinical trial within Novo Nordisk. So we do the same kind of validation of the program. So we program data sets, we do these complete runs where we also save the data and freeze it and so on. And we have discussions with stakeholders, medical writing and so on. So it was like a compressed kind of workflow from a clinical trial. And there we kind of used R directly in the process for the first time and proved that it was possible. At that time, it wasn't super efficient, but it was actually possible to do it. And kind of based off of that, I was able to kind of map out the risks of going into kind of a clinical trial. Like, what is it we need to build? Are there some things we kind of need to keep in SES still, or have SES kind of as our kind of validation goal on the side? And again, kind of use my power as one of these leads to say, well, now, okay, we actually believe in it so much that we will build everything we can in R for these phase 3 trials we have. And then we kind of have an exit strategy, like within 3 months, let's see if have we actually come some of the way that we wanted to go with R. And otherwise, I mean, we have SaaS infrastructure, we have programs from previous trials and so on. So kind of pivoting back wouldn't be hard. But like once we started with R, we just never stopped again. I mean,
there is no way back.
I mean, it just kept speeding up. And I think we could really prove that a lot of the things that we just in general wanted in biometrics, that we wanted to have like centralized code distribution, and we wanted to use Git more, and we want to be able to build and test our tools in a consistent way. And like all these things we kind of get through our packages and through the IDE itself. And so, I mean, the people working on it were very excited about working with it, and that kind of infects your workflow basically. I think that really became kind of a trigger point from where also the rest of the organization was kind of getting maybe FOMO, really, because now like they could see how fast we were kind of speeding up the development and pushing it out into the trials in my project. So yeah, looking back now, it was a lot of fun, but also a lot of hard work, basically.
Yeah, but I think it's a great example that you didn't have. I mean, you had to convince all the stakeholders at the very beginning, but it's great to see that there's a whole snowball effect and everyone's getting excited, and instead of like trying to convince them, they are getting inspired. But you mentioned that that the talent is mostly trained, and then people are skilled and they know how to use R. So do you see any differences in terms of like how it is it easier for you to attract and retain the talent right now that you are moving more modern technologies that are more exciting to work with?
Yeah, I mean, we could definitely see also kind of on the back of our webinar we did with Posit, and we kind of done subtle changes to our kind of job applications and so on. So we used to write like you should have experience in SES and preferably R, and Python is a plus. And now we switched it around, so it's R and SES and Python is a plus, right? And kind of, I think off the back of that positive webinar, I think like it was a kind of a tenfold number of applications we got from our programmers, basically, who wanted to be a part of this journey. And I think we had a few positions where we were now getting like over 1,000 people applying for those positions. So it has, and it's also kind of, I think our management can see that like if you offer more languages in your toolbox, even beyond just SAS and R, like it's a much kind of broader pool of people that you can pull from. And I think they also realized that, well, I mean, Python is good for a lot of things, R is good for a lot of things, and SAS is also good for some things, and kind of like you can actually weave these things together in a very good way. But yeah, we definitely see that the kind of students that we bring in, they know Python and then maybe R. A lot of the statisticians, they definitely know R. I think almost all university courses, at least here in the Nordic countries, are using R for everything, basically. Yeah. So we're hitting a critical mass, I think, now of people in the company who have R as their primary language, at least.
So you definitely have more diverse teams in terms of the skill sets and competencies. Do you notice any other, or maybe like definitely notice a lot of differences, but what are the biggest differences other than team setup in terms of submissions and computing environment? Like what in terms of tools, in terms of processes? Is it faster? What things are different and how they changed?
I think we've began to think a lot more. I mean, open source tools also brings in another kind of complexity. And there are like some maintenance things and ingestion things that you kind of need to iron out before you can get to like a good point where you can roll it out to many people. But I think we've started to think a lot more of our kind of clinical programming much more as software development than we previously did. So before we were just like writing code and I mean, we have this kind of famous quote internally from like 10 years ago when we were also trying to do this thing that, well, like we're not a software company, right? I mean, we are kind of a pharmaceutical company. We don't, our primary job is not to develop this software. But I mean, we sit and code every day, so that is our primary job basically. And I think now, we are starting to think about, well, if we want to do validation kind of in the clinical programming space, can we do unit tests of that? Can a programmer can we decompose the programming in a different way such that we can utilize a lot of these workflows around developing software in a much broader way? And it is more complex, but it also gives you kind of a lot of automatic tooling and some really nice things that also kind of benefits you if you want to do stuff in a TXP validated way.
And I think it's also like it takes away those like mundane and boring stuff away. Not everything, but it's definitely more time spent on the more exciting things.
And I think, I mean, one of the selling points I've always kind of used towards management is that, I mean, many of the programming languages can do the same thing. Like you can use an API also in SAS, and you can, I mean, I think what R has kind of given us internally is that it's kind of lowering the interface, like how many steps you have to take in order to kind of get to execution on your idea. And we really see that like stuff like Shiny and Quarto and what people are building now. And yeah, I think also kind of this ownership of like, you're not just getting like a standard macro kind of thrown on top of you. You can actually go in and make pull requests to the things you use in your daily work. And so the interface for doing a lot of things is just like really kind of been lowered quite a lot.
Are there any things, there's definitely a lot of lessons learned, but are there any things that you would do differently starting this transition or doing the first FDA submissions with R, having the knowledge that you have now?
Oh, I mean, if we knew, well,
Started earlier.
10 years ago what we do today, then I mean, there are many things that we've learned now, kind of in the way we validate things that were very unclear, and I think we kind of started also at a lucky point in the industry where like some work had been done from the R validation hub, and even now internally, like open source is also kind of gained a lot more recognition internally, not just because of our work, but also like if you want to use AI and kind of ingest some of these Python frameworks and so on, you need to have like validation pipelines to do that. So I mean, and today we have like a QMS pipeline for to kind of GXP validating IT systems and so on, or packages, and like if we had that 5-10 years ago, I mean, we would have been off to a flying start, I would say. And then also, I mean, it's still kind of a challenge to or I think it's a challenge that will persist no matter what you do, is kind of changing the way people work. Because, I mean, trials are long-lived, projects are long-lived. And I think even that move I did on my project, where I kind of forced R into a lot of trials, I would say like 80-90% of people thought that was really fun, but 10 to 20% also found it extremely frustrating because you're taking away kind of their tools to kind of build trust in what they are supposed to deliver.
Yes.
So some people really thrive in that environment, and some people do not thrive in that environment. So I've at least kind of reflected back on like, because we are so many people working on the same thing, what is it these different, both kind of of my colleagues, but also stakeholders, need to have trust in what we do? And some of that could just be like not printing out, but showing them like the TFL every other week, like this is the progression, we fixed this and so on. And for others, it is like, we coded it like this, and now let me show you kind of our thoughts behind it. And so I think if I were to do it all over again, I would hope that I would think a little bit more about kind of getting people on board with the change, and that hypercare for some people, especially when you kind of have the power to change it kind of just like that, I would say. Yeah, so that's at
Yeah.
least one of my personal
Yeah,
lessons.
I think change management is a big thing, especially in like in the very big organizations.
Yeah.
And are there any tangible benefits, tangible maybe like ROI that you can speak already about right now, except for increased applications and access to a broader talent pool that you mentioned earlier?
I think, I mean, there's a lot of things in kind of the initialization of a trial that we've been able to kind of automate with R, because we can build packages around APIs, and also kind of we made Git mandatory. We've been experimenting with it for a couple of years, but last year it was mandatory on all trials, and kind of that Git workflow is really helping us quite a lot. And on top of that, because we're now using Git, we can actually start to mine kind of our programming habits also between SAS and R and so on. And some very kind of rough, unvalidated numbers, I would say, is that we see that in general, people are like 33% faster going into R to solve a task than with SAS. And even new people, or some of the consultants we've had help from, who were also new to R. So I mean, and we use that quite a lot internally, kind of to also kind of push for adoption. So yeah, I think that's pretty cool.
And then in terms of because obviously like not everything that you do company wide is used with open source.
Yeah, so we've been on a long journey. I think because we had to prove so much internally, it was kind of more a matter of building something that works rather than building it open source. Even though we've always had those intentions, I think there's also an element of like giving back to some point because a lot of those tools that were built open source are kind of what has made us able to do all these things. So, and for the past 2 years, we've been trying to figure out how can we actually move some of this development kind of out in the open while still maintaining like this GXP qualification of our packages and curated repos and so on. And I think one of the things that we feel like we are good at Novo, the developers are here, is building a lot of these infrastructure components. And we have actually some releases coming out very soon. One about kind of a rework of an internal package, which is kind of an agnostic kind of input-output system where you can connect to databases like a Databricks, or you can actually connect to SharePoint, or you can use ODBC drivers, and kind of the interface to all of that is still the same. And then we have another one on creating logs, because that's a GXP requirement. We've always been kind of HTML first when we want to create our logs, and that will kind of come out this year, definitely, I think within the next 2 months or so. But it's taken like, I think like that journey switching from inner sourcing to open source has taken like 3-4 years, and there are still many aspects of that we haven't really figured out yet. So we're also kind of trying to see what other companies are doing there. But the strategy is definitely now that there is more and more stuff kind of going open source, because we also want to enable any regulatory reviewer to be able to execute the same code. And that's also why we focus on some of these kind of more agnostic things, where regardless on whether you're sitting on a Kubernetes cluster or on your local machine, the code for reading data is still the same, basically. So yeah, still some way to go, I would say. But it is kind of one of our strategic goals to have basically everything open source.
And in the conversation that we had before the recording, you mentioned that you feel that a lot of the things that can be replicated within the industry and other pharma companies, but also beyond the industry. So what would be the examples?
I mean, I think there will be now, I think there are multiple levels. Like the system side is kind of hard to replicate, but I think there's a lot of help now from the R Validation Hub and some of these new initiatives on images. And I think, I mean, what has always been Pharmaverse's goal is to provide those packages that you actually use kind of in your daily work, in the workflow. And I think our internal packages that are now going open source will also really complement a lot of those things. You can use our package for kind of reading, writing data, and so on. You can use Admiral and a lot of those metadata packages to do your Atom program. And then, so I think we are trying to cover all of those holes in the clinical workflow, so that other companies can do that as well. And there'll not be one kind of good or kind of the golden standard of a solution, but I think we're trying to put out as many options as possible, so that companies can kind of use what they need. But we're always kind of happy to talk with other companies about how we kind of GXP validated our systems and how we're trying to make it even better. So people can basically just reach out, and we'll do our best to accommodate and discuss with them.
I think this is very important thing to collaborate actually within the industry, because a lot of the things are happening in silos and people essentially doing the same thing using similar tools, but without that cooperation, it is very, very ineffective. What are the next big things, big projects for Novo and for you?
I mean, so we have been working on these packages that we're putting out for quite some time. And then now we'll kind of shift focus to kind of more the business deliverable side. So ingesting kind of Admiral and building kind of a good workflow around that internally. And we have kind of a large standardization project ongoing where we want to look at SCDM and ADAM and tables, figures, and listings and kind of buy into this CDISC 360 vision on building up metadata and having more automatic execution of those things. And we really hope to have kind of development out in the open, because now we're kind of starting something new. We're not necessarily reworking old inner source packages. So I think the next 3 years or so will kind of be spent on building up a really good kind of clinical trial workflow. And then, of course, I mean, AI is kind of being pushed on top of us. And I think we really want to find those good use cases that create a lot of value, where it also fits in with a nice development experience for our data scientists and so on. So we have a lot of projects kind of on that as well.
Since you mentioned the AI, I just want to do a quick follow-up questions. Where do you think AI can actually help within the clinical trials process?
I mean, we're looking at it kind of in multiple places. There is kind of on one side, it's kind of your planning. Like if you're a data scientist overseeing multiple trials, how could you get help kind of knowing when to do the next task at the correct kind of time, and how can you be put into that trial context? Like you can have very different trials, and also to enable resources within the company to move more freely. And then we're looking at kind of some experimentation with code generation or building kind of scripts from different kind of code modules. And one of the hard things there is like figuring out the execution order of things. Like if you have many smaller modules and you want to build them into something bigger, what's the kind of execution flow for that? And then right now we're using Azure DevOps internally as a kind of primary code repository. And we know GitHub has a lot of kind of co-pilot functionality, both in issue management and in the pull request. And like we have this small dream that we could get like a trained pull request pilot that could check like how standardized are this code. Are you living up to our kind of standards, both in the terms of what the code is generating, but also code style, and are you using approved packages, and kind of getting support directly in a pull request to just be more compliant with our internal standards.
And is it more of a dream, or is it something that it can happen in the next few years?
I would say that the pull request one can definitely happen. I mean, I think with some help from Microsoft, it will be there probably at some point. I think the other ones are also quite likely, I would say. I mean, there have been some huge investment internally also to kind of get an AI tech ops team up and running. We have internally hosted models with different confidentiality filters, and we have some really nice infrastructure in place now kind of around those things. And now it's a matter of like what products can we then build on top of that infrastructure. So I think we will see it in various places. But we don't really know how difficult it is yet. Also because I think one of our primary focus is that the the kind of data scientist experience at Novo still needs to be nice. Like you still need to feel like you are coding stuff. So any help you can get kind of within the IDE is kind of preferred to us, instead of sending things off that are generating and then reviewing and then sending it off and having this, kind of out of context development flow.
To finish off, we ask all of our guests to answer what is the problem in your field that you're surprised that has not been solved yet.
Oh, I think it's sharing data with authorities. Like, I think we are still on a solution from, I think it's from 95 or 98. And that just puts so many constraints on, like you can have this big, beautiful flow and a super automatic, and then you still have to create like a data set that is 10 times as large as kind of like the golden standard today, or even 20 times larger. And that part, and I know it's not something we really can solve like on the sponsor side, but it's more on the authority side. But oh, how I wish that it could just be Parquet instead of XPT, for instance. And yeah, maybe it'll come. But yeah, I'm surprised that we haven't. We're pushing for it, but I'm surprised that we haven't got further with that part yet.
Still a way to go. Thank you so much, Ari, for sharing this. I would highly recommend to our listeners to check out the recording from the webinar with Possit, where you shared the whole story on the first FDA, R-based FDA submission. And then if you feel like there is anybody that would enjoy this episode, share it with them. Thank you so much, Ari. Have a lovely day, and I'll speak to you later. Bye.
Yeah, happy to hear. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you for listening. This was Where Technology Meets Science by Appsilon. If you know someone who might enjoy the episode, share it with them and subscribe to never miss a new episode. At Appsilon, we empower pharmaceutical and life science companies to leverage open source technology for faster data-driven decision-making in regulated environments. Until the next time.